Russia owns 1/11th of all the land on Earth. That fact is so large it barely registers as a geographical statistic and begins to feel more like a cosmological one. When you lay Russia on a map next to the rest of the world's nations, it does not merely dominate the map, it overwhelms it. It stretches across 11 time zones, from the Baltic coast in the west to the Pacific shores of Kamchatka in the east. The distance is so vast that when it is midnight in Moscow, it is already the following morning in Vladivostok. And yet, when you look at Russia from space at night, that geographic dominance begins to feel hollow. The nighttime image shows a country that is lit in only one place. A relatively small triangle in the far west corner of the country, the dense cluster of cities and towns that runs roughly between Moscow and St. Petersburg and the Ural Mountains, glowing with the light of 145 million people compressed into a fraction of the total territory. Everything east of the Urals, everything that makes Russia the geographical colossus it appears to be on a daytime map, sits in a darkness so complete and so vast that it looks less like the interior of a country and more like open ocean. The question this image demands is the same question that has defined Russian geopolitics for centuries. Why has the largest country on Earth concentrated the overwhelming majority of its population into a corner of its western edge, while the remaining 3/4 of its territory, Siberia and the Russian Far East, and the great frozen plains of the north, sits almost entirely empty, inhabited by fewer people per square kilometer than almost any other region on the planet that is not literally covered by ice? The answer most people give first is the cold. And the cold is real. It is severe and it is not to be dismissed. Siberia contains some of the coldest permanently inhabited places on Earth. Towns like Oymyakon in the Republic of Sakha, where temperatures have been recorded below -60 degrees Celsius. The ground there is frozen so deeply and so permanently that it has not thawed since the last ice age. Winters across most of Siberia are long, dark, and metabolically expensive in ways that make ordinary life significantly harder and significantly more costly than in the milder climates of European Russia. But cold alone does not explain the emptiness. Cold has never prevented human settlement when the land beneath the cold offers sufficient agricultural or economic reward. The real explanation for why Siberia remains empty goes deeper than temperature, and it touches something more fundamental about the relationship between geography and the possibility of civilization. At its core, the question is whether the land can feed the people who live on it, and in Siberia, the answer, for most of the territory, is no. Underneath roughly 65% of Russian territory lies permafrost. Permafrost does more than make winters cold. It makes the ground itself hostile to agriculture in ways that temperature alone does not. It prevents the deep root systems that crops require, and it causes the ground to heave and buckle under structures built on its surface. Roads, pipelines, and foundations are slowly destroyed by that movement. And the patient consistency of that destruction makes infrastructure in permafrost zones extraordinarily expensive to build and even more expensive to maintain. Combine permafrost with short growing seasons and thin soils, and vast stretches of Siberia cannot produce the agricultural surplus that sustained settlement requires. Without reliable agriculture, you cannot support the dense farming communities that generate the population densities from which cities grow. Without agriculture, there is no surplus. Without surplus, there are no cities. And without cities, there is no economic gravity to pull more people in. The emptiness, therefore, perpetuates itself, a feedback loop that geography initiated and human settlement patterns have faithfully reproduced ever since. But the geographical constraints of Siberia go beyond agriculture, permafrost, and cold. The infrastructure problems that permafrost creates are compounded by the sheer scale of the distances involved. Those distances are so vast that connecting the Russian Far East to the European core by road or rail requires feats of engineering that have historically been achievable only at costs that strain even a large national economy. The Trans-Siberian Railway, that legendary achievement of late imperial Russian engineering completed in 1916, runs for nearly 10,000 kilometers from Moscow to Vladivostok. It remains one of the longest railway lines in the world. Yet for all its ambition, it connects only a thin corridor of settlement along its route, leaving the enormous spaces north and south of the line as empty after the railway's completion as they were before. Because a single rail line through a continent-sized wilderness is not infrastructure in any meaningful sense. It is a thread. Threads do not develop territory, they merely cross it. And here is where the geographical story of Russia's empty interior connects to something that most histories of Russia treat as political rather than geographical. It is the relentless, centuries-long Russian drive to acquire warm water ports and to project power southward and westward towards seas that do not freeze. Russia's geographical position, vast in area but locked behind frozen coasts for much of the year, has always produced a strategic problem that no amount of territorial expansion has fully solved. The problem is access, being able to move goods and military power in and out through ports that remain navigable in winter. That need has driven Russian foreign policy with a consistency that transcends individual leaders and individual ideologies. From Tsarist expansion toward the Black Sea, the Baltic, and the Pacific in the 18th and 19th centuries, to Soviet interventions in Afghanistan and the Middle East in the 20th century, to the conflicts over Ukraine and Crimea in the 21st century, each episode differs in its details, but is connected by the same underlying geographical logic. It is the logic of a country that owns more land than any other on Earth and yet feels perpetually constrained by the geography of that land, perpetually searching for warm water access and the strategic depth that its size seems to promise, but that its position on the map consistently withholds. And this is perhaps the deepest paradox that Russia's geography produces, that a country defined by its vastness has always governed itself as if it were besieged, always reaching beyond its enormous borders for something that the borders themselves cannot provide, always treating its size as a problem to be managed rather than an advantage to be enjoyed. This raises the question that Russia's map has always implicitly posed but never quite answered, whether the country's greatness and its geography are the same thing, or whether they are in permanent tension with each other. Whether Russia is powerful because of how much land it holds, or whether it is constrained because so much of that land holds nothing back in return. Perhaps the most honest answer is that both things are true simultaneously, that Russia's territory is at once its greatest strategic asset and its greatest logistical burden. A country so large that no enemy can easily conquer it, and so empty that it has never been able to fully inhabit itself. The nighttime satellite image, with its small bright triangle in the west and its vast dark emptiness stretching to the Pacific, is not a picture of a country that failed to develop its interior, but a picture of a country that the geography of its interior never fully permitted to try. When you look at that image and then look at the daytime map, with its confident and enormous expanse of territory, you are seeing two different truths about the same place. The truth of what Russia owns and the truth of what Russia can use. The distance between those two truths is, in a very real sense, the distance between what Russia appears to be and what it actually is, which may be the most important geographical fact about the most geographically consequential country on Earth.